Well, good morning. Thanks everyone for joining us. My name is Sarah Samuels. I'm the Programs and Communications Manager here at ABNY. And we're so excited to have a very special guest with us today, Frances Resheske, who's not only a member of our ABNY board, but also a member of the ABNY Foundation Board, which is very exciting. And she's had an amazing career and has been involved in so many different wonderful ABNY endeavors, but also New York endeavors. So she'll speak a little bit about this. As a reminder, you can promote ABNY at A Better NY. And the way that we're going to format this is that we'll have about 45 minutes of moderated Q&A, and then we'll switch it over to audience questions. So if you want to either slide your questions in the chat or use the raise hand function, we'll call on you to ask your question live. We're really trying to create like an intimate feel for these events. So feel free to, pop in and you could message me and I'll put you in the queue for the questions. We're also very lucky to have as the host for today, Ruth Fasold, who is not only killing it over at Lyft in New York, but is also a member of YP Steering Committee and a former member of ABNY. So we're in very capable hands, and I will pass it over to Ruth. So thank you all for joining.
Thanks, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. I am on the edge of aging out of YP, but I'm excited to do it from start to finish. So, and I'm super thrilled to be able to do something with Frances because she's my favorite. So let me do a little intro. So good morning, everyone. Thanks for jumping on this morning. And as Sarah said, my name is Ruth Fasold. I am the Senior Policy Manager for Lyft here in New York. And I've had that job about 2 years, but I have been an ABNY member and advocate for over a decade. And I used to work at ABNY. So in that vein, I just want to say a really big thanks to all the ABNY team because they are small and mighty. And I know how hard they work to put on these great events for us. So thank you to you girls. I'm thrilled to be hosting this morning and introduce you to Frances Resheske. Frances is the Senior Vice President of Corporate Affairs for Con Ed. She oversees Con Ed's corporate communications, community and media relations, economic development, branding, advertising, and corporate philanthropy. And because that is not enough, she also handles government relations, regulatory relations, and the energy markets policy group in this role. Before joining Con Ed, Frances was the General Manager of Government Relations and Community Development at Keyspan Energy, and previously had held several positions in the Koch administration. She is President Emeritus of the Board of Directors for the Queen's Theater, a board member of Alfred E. Smith Foundation, League of Conservation Voters, Grow NYC, the New York Building Congress, and lucky for us, as Sarah said, Association for a Better New York and our foundation. I've known Frances for many years, and when I first started working at ABNY, so many years ago, Frances was one of the first friendly faces I was lucky enough to cross paths with. She's an amazing leader, an amazing mentor, and those are two things that you always hope, but don't necessarily always do go together. Frances announced earlier this year she would be retiring from Con Ed, so even more than normal, I'm really thrilled to get this opportunity to sit down and learn about her experiences. So thank you everybody for joining. And Frances, just to kick us off, why don't you share, well, you can share however you'd like to kick it off, but I would love to know how you first found ABNY and what has kept you coming back.
Sure. So first of all, thank you very much for that lovely introduction. And Ruth, it is a pleasure knowing you for many years too. And hello to some friends and hello to new people that I'm meeting today. So I first got introduced to ABNY when I got this job 23 years ago. And most of you know, Bill Rudin is very involved in ABNY. And those were the days when his father and his uncle, Lou and Jack Rudin, were still alive. And they were the founders of ABNY. And their stories were just incredibly amazing to me because they formed ABNY, I believe, in the 70s, when New York was really not in great shape and the city was potentially going bankrupt and there was lots of crime and there were lots of issues going on. And these great city civic leaders got together, to really help and partner with government to make the city a better place. I'm happy to say I was a teenager in the 70s. I wasn't part of that. But I did live in New York, and I remember those days. And, we talk about issues in the city now, and those were the days where, if you had a chain on and you got on the subway, you put your chain under your shirt and you turned your rings around. And, it was a dark days in New York City. And these amazing civic leaders really stepped up to help. And when I first got involved with ABNY in 1999, they were still around advising the next iteration of leaders. And I've seen it my entire career that whatever is happening in New York, this group gets together and bands together to figure out solutions. And one of the things I think that keeps me coming back is it's always a positive discussion. It's never a whine session. It's never like a woe is me session, but we're New Yorkers. We want to be here. We want a great city. And what can we do to make it better?
I love that. I do remember Lou Rudin used to say, I think it maybe was in the documentary or something, there's just this idea of we're not going to be able to move our buildings over to, Long Island or New Jersey. We are a part of this and we want to help find a solution. And so it was a true, that's when you have a true public-private partnership, when everybody is that level of invested. And I think that might be why it always does feel like it's coming from a positive place. So that's amazing. I wish I had been able to meet Lou and get to be a part of ABNY that early on. I love that. How were the breakfasts smaller back then, the power breakfast, or were they just as big?
They were pretty much smaller. I'm trying to think. Mary Holloway was the executive director when I first got introduced to ABNY. And I don't even know if we had the power breakfast in the same way. That may have started under Michelle Adams, who was also a former executive director. But I recall much smaller committee meetings where people would sit around the table and discuss issues, as opposed to the larger engagement with elected officials and opinion leaders in the city, which I think are very important. And, it's funny, it's one of the things I prioritize when ABNY has a breakfast. I prioritize going, and I prioritize getting there when the doors open, because everybody's there and you get a chance to talk to people. And, the virtual world is okay, but to me, there's nothing like interacting and coming across people you might not have seen in a while and having that side conversation that you don't necessarily schedule a meeting for. So I think that is as important as listening to the speakers and the questions.
I 100% agree. And for any YPs who are on the call, you have the ability to come to Power Breakfast. If you never have, you can buy tickets, but also I think sometimes ABNY will do a raffle for YP members so that they can get a chance to go as well without having to buy, if that's a barrier. So they're definitely worth keeping an eye out for. And I always say a Power Breakfast is really amazing because you realize that all the decision makers in New York City can fit in one conference room in Midtown Manhattan, and you get a chance to watch them work and say hello to people. So I love it. Okay, so we know you're on the ABNY board, but as I said in your intro, you're on many a board. How do you pick what gets your time? You said you do prioritize ABNY, which I love, but you have so much on your plate. So how do you pick who and when you get engaged with different boards?
So before I answer me personally, let me just step back and say, Con Edison has a real commitment to community. In fact, every officer is expected to sit on a nonprofit board. We have a major volunteer program with over 1,000 volunteers every year participating all over the city, Westchester and Orange and Rockland counties. So part of my portfolio, my professional portfolio, is our philanthropy. So I lead that, and I work with people throughout the company to encourage them to be on boards. So I believe that I need to be a leader in that space also. What we do when we put people on boards is we partner. Well, we have strategic areas of giving, and they are arts, particularly around education and capacity building, the environment, and we define environment broadly. It's sustainability, it's clean energy, it's clean water. It's also our parks and our bike routes and all of that. We do a lot in STEM, but very specific. Girls, future education, future engineers, coding, a lot around cyber, which is critically important in my industry. Then we do civic work, which ABNY falls into. We also do things like, in the last 2 years, a lot of food where people couldn't eat. So in that space, whatever community and civic is important at the time, immigration. So those are the areas. And what we ask people to do is sit on boards that my group picks, the boards we contribute to in those areas, and then you pick your geographic area. So when I look at what boards I want to participate in, I like to participate across the spectrum of our strategic areas. I've probably been on 25 nonprofit boards over the years. I don't want to be on more than 4 or 5, 6, because then you really can't give of yourself. And I don't believe in being on a board and just having it on your resume. I think it's important that you care about the cause. I think it's important that you participate in the board meetings and you speak up and you give your opinion. I think it's important that, like I said, care, but really like be passionate about how you're spending your time. And I also think it's important that you think about giving financially. Like, we ask everybody that sits on a board to give personally. Some nonprofit boards cannot apply for a grant if they don't have 100% giving. And that can be $25, it can be $50, it can be $100. So it doesn't have to be large grants. So I do that too. I give a lot of money personally. I spend a lot of time volunteering and on boards. So the boards that I'm currently on are ones that I think are very much the fabric of New York City. Boards like Grow New York and League of Conservation Voters, critically important now. Clearly, sustainability has been an issue in my industry for many years, but I think it's being talked about much broader now. And there are industries that perhaps weren't focused on it in the past that are now. And then, we've spoken about ABNY. The Building Congress is the same. The Building Congress is a group that brings together business leaders, union leaders, nonprofit leaders. I co-chair their energy committee, and I think it's really important, if we're going to find solutions in that space, that it's across fields. So that's how I pick my boards. I was the chair of the Queen's Theater for 20 years, but most of the boards I'm on, I'm generally on for 5 or 6 years, and then I rotate off and join another group. But I'm planning to stay with ABNY even after I retire.
Yay. That's great. Yeah, during COVID was the first time I've joined a proper board myself, a nonprofit board, and it's been a great experience. I think it's a really excellent part of your professional growth to get the opportunity to serve for a community group and bring your expertise, whatever it may be. So it's a good. I like that Con Ed really does have that as one of the pillars they want their employees to do, because I think it's made me better at my own job and just feel like I'm making a bigger difference in the city I call home, which is always my drive. So I think that's really nice.
I think that's a great point. And I completely encourage people to join nonprofit boards. It gives you a very different perspective than whatever your professional field is. And it's a good learning opportunity besides the contribution you make. That's a great point, Ruth.
100%. I love it. Because you were talking about League of Conservation Voters and all of that, I might actually, and last week was Earth Day. I would love if you could just talk a little bit more, and this is kind of switching gears, but about what Con Ed is doing in the renewable energy space. I think it's so timely. From the Lyft side, we're very interested in the EV infrastructure side of power. It's just like a really interesting and complicated issue. So I would love to just hear a little more about that.
So one thing I would say is most people probably think of Con Edison as the regulated utility in New York City. And that is a large piece of our business, but not the only piece of our business. We also have a business that does solar and wind, and we are the second largest solar producer in North America. We're in 20 states right now, and we're in about 6 states with wind. So that's a significant part of our business. The only reason we don't generate in New York renewables is because we were taken out of the generation business through deregulation in 1999. And we've actually had legislation that we've been working on for the past 5 years to allow us back in the generating space, just in the renewable space, not in any other place. So that's a big part of our business. On the regulated side, we say that energy efficiency is the best thing you can do. So not using the electricity and not using the gas, that is the best way to get to the sustainability we all want. So we've had very aggressive energy efficiency programs since the 1970s, way ahead of many other utilities in the country. Transportation is a big issue for us. We have one of the most aggressive electric vehicle programs in the country. We're right now partnering with the city and the state on building out charging stations, because part of the electric vehicle, Ruth, issue, it's a chicken and an egg. People won't buy the cars if there aren't the charging stations. People don't want to build charging stations if they don't have the volume of cars. So we are very aggressively working at building charging stations. The city has a gas ban that goes into effect in 2027. So we are working on alternatives to gas. We have a big heat pump program, and we have a big geothermal program, both of which are growing and really started out very small several years ago, but they're growing both in people understanding what they are and people putting them in. In New York City, St. Patrick's Cathedral is the biggest geothermal installation we have to date. So it's a significant piece of property. And they made that decision for environmental reasons, not for cost reasons, because sometimes people talk about it's more expensive, but we're definitely heading in that direction. And I was going to say one other thing. On the gas side, we're looking at what is the proper transition, because right now, natural gas heats almost all of New York City. New York City has not had coal since the 60s. So a lot of places are morphing from coal to natural gas. New York really has to morph from natural gas to renewables. And both the city and state have aggressive goals that we're working on with them, but we have to make sure they get built. And one of the things in the energy industry is nothing is short term. So most of the solar farms and wind farms are going to be upstate, because you don't have that amount of land in New York City to build on. So they'll be upstate, and then you build transmission lines to bring the energy downstate. A typical build for a transmission line is 10 years. So with renewable goals hitting in 2030, 2040, and 2050, we really need all hands on deck to meet those goals. So we're very much invested in it. The last thing I guess I'd say from an Earth Day perspective, we do a lot of consumer education. What can you do? There are little things you can do. Everybody can be more energy efficient, right? It sounds silly, but like unplug your chargers and turn the light out when you leave the room, and all of that stuff adds up. Don't idle your car. Put the temperature at 65 when you're not home. It really adds up when everybody's doing it.
I get those emails from Con Ed. I like them. I think when I think about a private company working closely with government to get things like this done, I always think that the long-term plan must be a bit of a struggle, because we know that electeds, you have agency work, and that there are many people who are in that for life. And so they have the long-term vision, but a lot of electeds are here for just a certain amount of years and then go away. So there's a lot of re-education and a lot of making sure they understand that the middle is still important and still happening, even if there isn't the, as I say, there isn't the like champagne toast or the ribbon cutting, you still want them to understand what's happening. And so maybe you could talk a little about, you have worked in government, as I said in the beginning, you were in the Koch administration. And so working inside of government and outside of government, and just ABNY, which is such a public-private partnership at its core, how well do you think private companies and the government communicate? Can you think of ways that you think it were better, or ways that you're so glad that you balance each other out? Anything around that I think would be interesting to hear about.
So I guess I think the world has changed, right? I think that I think it was much more collaborative in the past. You know, I used to say when I worked for Koch and I worked in Keyspan in the first 10 years, and I spent a lot of time in Albany, and, you know, you discuss issues and it was about the issue. It wasn't personal. And then you'd go to the bar at night or you'd go play softball at night. And the next day, maybe you were on the same side of an issue. And I think that collaboration is really important. And if we could somehow get back to that, and the real polarization, I think it's become a badge of honor not to compromise. And it just doesn't work. You know, like if you're really dug into your position and you won't listen to anybody else, it's hard to move things forward. And I always say, you know, really, really smart people have different opinions. And I am not a conservative, but there are very conservative people that are very smart, right? And I don't think you can just dismiss people's opinions. And I think that's a real stumbling block to us moving forward. I do believe in New York City that the business community is probably more liberal than perhaps in other places in the country, and that their thinking is more aligned with government's thinking in terms of goals. And I do think that when there's a crisis, much like when ABNY started, business and government comes together. So that kind of approach, I think, is what we need to move things forward. It's got to be a partnership. And if you think about New York City, if we looked at corporations and nonprofits and government, everybody has many of the same issues, right? You know, I'm in meetings where we're talking about sustainability and energy. I'm in meetings where we're talking about the homeless crisis in New York City. I'm in meetings where we're talking about people being afraid to go on the subways. I'm in meetings where we're talking about, you know, what is the answer to recovery for New York City and when is it going to happen? And I believe it will. You know, I led the war room in this company through 9/11 and the aftermath. And those were really dark days for New York City. And I remember the people saying, nobody will ever live downtown again. Well, look at downtown, right?
Right.
And I think the same thing is going to happen now, but we all have to work together. And if we could get to that mentality on a day-to-day thinking basis, I think we would be better off and we would move issues more quickly. We have many new elected officials who I think have a particular perspective that that's what they're there to fight for, and they're not really interested in compromising. And then we have many elected officials who, on all sides of the aisles, because I think there's more than one aisle these days, are really reaching out to the other sides, and I think they're the ones that are going to make the difference. And I would say my perspective of the business community in New York is they've always been there to step up if asked, and always been willing to participate in solutions. You know, I'm thinking, like, prior to my coming to Con Edison, it's hard to believe the way it is now, but Union Square was a dangerous place to be. And this was prior to my tenure, but the business community around Union Square got together with the bid and got together with a high school in the neighborhood and talked about, like, what's wrong in this neighborhood and what do we have to do to fix it. And the principal had a lot to do with the school, and the bid had a lot to do with cleaning up in the park and all of that. And the business community funded it, and everybody won. So those are the kind of models that I think are what we should look at for today's issues.
Yeah, I love that you're always looking for that elusive win-win, and that was a win-win-win. So that's amazing. And I do think, you know, your point about the business community funding it, I mean, it really is true. You know, we just came out of budget season, and it's true that there is just not enough money in the government to do all the things that we as a community for New York City or New York State need. So the business community really is a partner, and I think wants to be a partner because we are a part of the community. We are, you know, you said you were here when you were a teenager. I've lived here for over a decade. I want the place I live to be a good place, and I'm part of the business community. So So I think sometimes people forget the humanity behind the business, which is just New Yorkers.
No, it's true.
Yeah. You know, we do have a new administration. You mentioned lots of new electeds, including a new mayor and a majority female, also large majority new first time elected city council. Are there things that you are excited that they've been picking up to work on in their first year? Are there issues that you really hope they focus on, either the administration or the council?
I think they really do have to focus on the issue of crime. And some of it, I think, is crime, and some of it, I think, is the perception of crime. You know, I obviously was locked down with everybody else in the beginning of 2020, but since the lockdown was lifted, I've been on the subway regularly, several times a day, sometimes since the middle of 2020. There's 3 times, 2 of which were Sunday afternoons, when I was pretty uncomfortable and I left. And all 3 of which were very early on. You know, I ride the subway during the day, I ride the subway at night. You know, things happen, yes, but I think the perception may possibly be worse than the reality. So I think that's important. I think the economic recovery of the city is important. I personally believe that there's an important role for being in the office. I don't think anybody's ever going to be in the office 5 days a week again. I don't think that's necessary. I don't think you need to be in an office for a structured number of hours necessarily, but I do believe there's an importance to collaboration, and I think that conversations happen that wouldn't otherwise happen. I think learning happens. You know, we all learn from each other, right? I don't think it's top-down learning. It's like, you know, I have a conversation with people in my group and they teach me something I didn't know. And that's not going to happen. They're not going to call a meeting for that, right? So I think part of the economic recovery of the city is people coming back. The theaters are crowded, the restaurants are crowded, all of that helps. So I think that's a top priority, to get back to or get up to whatever the future New York City is going to look like. And the homeless problem, I mean, you know, it is my opinion, it's not a policing issue. It's a mental health problem, and we have to take care of those people, and we have to figure out solutions for those New Yorkers also. And I think that's the real way that we move forward.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's great. We're getting close to when I'm going to open it up to some questions, but before I do that, I do want to spend a couple minutes just talking about you being a female in the corporate world. It's something I'm really interested in, and also even when I think about, you know, early 90s ABNY days, I honestly I can't imagine there was that many females. I'm sure there's many more now. So I would just be curious, over your career, what has changed about being a female leader and what is the same still?
So I began my career in government. So I was in a very diverse situation in my 20s. And I believe that you don't win as an elected official if you surround yourself with people that yes you to death. You have to surround yourself with diversity. So I spent my 20s working for Koch in a very diverse situation, and he had a super smart administration. And I was in the room, I was 22 years old. I was in the room with these senior people, and I learned so much from them. And I actually credit my career with those years because I was allowed and expected to do lots of different things. So that's how I began my career. And then I'm 30 years old and I go to Keyspan, and I'm the only woman in the room 95% of the time. And 95% of the time, there are only white people in the room. It was horrifying to me. It was something I didn't expect, and it began my interest in diversity and inclusion and mentoring young people. And I've been doing that my whole career, and I think it's really important. And for women particularly, I grew up at a time where the senior woman in the room liked being the only senior woman in the room. She didn't help you, When I left the company to come here, she called me and she said, I'm losing a GM. And I say, when I speak to women's groups, what I felt like is she said to me, I'm losing a number on a piece of paper. That's like all she cared about. But I think we have a responsibility when we move up to help the people behind us. And then I always say, when I'm speaking to people, younger people, then turn around and look at the people behind you and help them, because that's how we will get an inclusive world. The other thing I would tell you is when I came here 23 years ago, the charge was to build the corporate affairs department. It was where they put people that they didn't know what to do with in those days. So I knew that I was coming in to like really shake things up. So I was hiring people, and I hired my 3 direct reports, a Black man and 2 white women were the people I chose. And I chose them because they were the best people for the job, not because of who they were demographically. And I said to them, because we all really believe in diversity, and not just numbers, like diversity of opinion, like speak up, right? Tell me you think I'm wrong. And I said to them, hire whoever you want, hire the best person for the job. And when we're halfway through hiring, we'll look at our numbers. And we were just fine. And I probably have had the most diverse department in Con Edison for 23 years. I would also tell you, when I came to this company, it was much more female friendly. We had 3 women on our board out of 10, 23 years ago. Wow. We had a female CFO. We were on our 2nd female general counsel. I was a direct report, or am a direct report, to the chairman. And I said, I've always had the same opportunities, and I always get yelled at the same way. And that is just fine with me. So I think it has changed. The other thing I would tell you that I think has changed is the whole issue around debating whether diversity is like good for business. Nobody ever debated that non-diverse slates were good for business, right? So we can debate that all we want, but I think we're coming to a place in many companies where it is an accepted fact that you get better results when you bring different perspectives to the table. And I think that is really important to consider. You just don't get the best results when you surround yourself with people that yes you to death. And the last thing I would say is, thankfully, nothing serious ever happened to me from a diversity perspective, but some of the things that were said, or some of the being left out, all of that kind of thing that was acceptable is really not acceptable anymore. And you can't function that way in business. And I think that is a good thing. So if you don't particularly believe in diversity, you should keep your feelings to yourself when you come into the office. And that the behavior is not accepted anymore. I haven't been the only woman in a room in a long time. So I think that's a good thing too.
That's amazing. Yeah, thank you for sharing all of that. I do sometimes see 2 separate types of female leaders, and I'm sure there's actually, dozens of types, but I can often put them into these groups that are the type of female leader. It's like, oh, I made it into the room, thank God, and then shuts the door. And then the female leader is like, I made it in, you should come in too. And those 2 different things. And so I love people such as yourself who are always thinking about who else you can bring in. And I know you've been a mentor to my mentor, and then I try to do that with myself. And so it just really does trickle down in a positive way. So thank you for that.
It's really important.
It's so important, and it feels good. It feels good. I do, at my last job, there were a couple of times I was in meetings and I would stop the meeting and just say, I just want to point out, this is an all-female meeting. And it would just be so amazing to take note of that and realize it. And we were 15 minutes in and just doing our work, and it wasn't, it wasn't a part of it, but I just wanted to say it.
It's funny when you say that. I'll just tell you a quick funny story. When I was at Brooklyn Union, I was not an officer. And I wasn't even a GM yet, which is a level below officer. And we had a female regulator coming in to visit us. And the CFO was planning the meeting. And I said to him, you should have a woman in the room. And, he's like, I'm not having a woman in the room just for the sake of having a woman in the room. So I said, I run government relations. You could have me in the room. There's a reason. So he chooses not to have a woman in the room. She walks in, there are 10 men. The first thing she said is, I'm coming back next week and I want to meet with the 10 top women in this company. And so the 10 top women in the company, I was one of them, and I wasn't even an officer or a GM yet, which says something, right?
Yeah.
So she comes back and she meets with us, and he walks into the room and he's like, oh my God, this feels so weird. And she turned around and she said, what do you think we feel like every day? And so when you're not included, you notice it. But when you are included, perhaps you don't. So that looking around the room and saying who's here, I think that's important too.
100%. That's amazing story. Good for her. I do have a couple more questions, but I know there are a few that I've been getting in the chat. So I'm gonna give folks a chance to ask you questions directly, if that's okay. And so I know first up we have Steph Wheaton. And Steph, do you have any good nails going on? Because I saw you the other day and you had excellent nails. So if you could start by telling us that and then ask your question.
Today it's very simple, just a quick French with pink.
I love how that's simple for you. It's beautiful.
I mean, I wanted something a little bit more conservative, and this is what I landed on. Good to see everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. Frances, my name is Stephanie. I work at the Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment. And like you, I started my career really in public service, and I'm still here. I plan on being here for a while. But what you talked about with cooperation, not just in, like it really sticks with me, because that's something that I really value, and something along those lines, a little bit out of what we were discussing, but in that spirit of cooperation, I know Con Edison does a whole lot with projects around the city. Is there like a way that you folks work with other agencies to kind of streamline your calendar, make sure that like things aren't happening all at once? Is there any way that we can work as a city to foster that cooperation, or anything that we can do to make that a little bit easier? That makes sense.
So I heard part of the question, a calendar around what? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the whole thing.
I'm in a different office. Is there any, like, does Con Ed work with any other agencies to streamline like a calendar of like when your projects are occurring? Is there any way that we can be using data to make sure that we're not all doing the same thing at the same time? Anything like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's a couple of things that goes on. One of the biggest issues is street work. When the city's doing street work and then we do street work, part of the problem is there has been movement around the people that work in the street to say that utility work is not public work, and that the government and the utility have to bid the job separately. So about 8 years ago, we got legislation that said, no, that's not right. Because what would happen is the city would bid the job, the contractor would bid low, the street would be open, we bid our job, the contractor would bid high, and we're negotiating when the street is open. And that was counterproductive for everyone except people making money. So the city and the utilities got together and got legislation that said we could bid it together. And actually it was after 9/11 that we did a pilot project downtown, because there was so much federal money coming into the city, and we proved that it worked better. So that's one of the things that we're doing. It's not perfect, but it's better than it was, because it's the worst thing in the world for a community if somebody goes in and does street work and then closes up the street and somebody else comes in and reopens it the next week. The other place where we work together is in shutoffs. Gas shutoffs is a big issue in the city. Gas is dangerous, and gas is our #1 safety consideration if it's in a dangerous situation, because it's not dangerous when it's safe, but it is dangerous if it's not safe. So if you have leaking pipes, if we come in and see that you have leaking pipes, we shut the gas off immediately, and it has to be rectified before we can put you back on. And the rectification is determined by the buildings department. So that's an area also where if people have their gas shut off, and then the city and Con Edison have to work together with the landlord to get the landlord to do what's necessary to turn it back on. So we do a lot of work with the buildings department. We do a lot of work with DOT. There's a lot of work with DEP around water mains, because there's a lot of water main work going on in the city right now. And when the water main project is being done, if we have pipes that are in the way, we have to move those pipes, even if they're perfectly good pipes. And then the water main goes in, and then we have to rebuild our system. So that's another place we're working to have good coordination. It's not perfect, but I think both the city and Con Edison are aware of the issues that are out there. But if you know any projects that we need better coordination, I'm happy to help.
I mean, I work for the Office of Media and Entertainment, so we tend to throw in some movie production, usually right where you guys are. So definitely looking forward to working with Con Edison in the future to make sure we're doing better by New Yorkers. Thank you so much.
Happy to help.
Thanks for that, Steph. And it's a really interesting and great point. You wouldn't necessarily think that the media relations, the Office of Media Relations needs to align closely with Con Ed, but you do. You're right. If Con Ed is working and needs to work with every single agency because you're touching all parts of the city always. Mm-hmm. Let's move on to our next question. It's going to be Julia Kemper.
Frances, thank you so much for taking the time today to chat with us. It's been a really interesting conversation. I work for Fairstead, and we are a real estate developer in the city that focuses on affordable housing. And I'm in the ESG department, so I was really interested when you were talking about the geothermal program, and I was wondering if you had just like a little bit more information about that, kind of like what it is and like how it works.
It's first of all, we have a whole section on our website about it, so you can get more information there. And after you look at it, if you need anything, ABNY knows how to get in touch with me, so I can get stuff for you. But it's one of what we're looking at is as an alternative to gas, right? So if the city is banning gas for future construction, there's going to be a gap at some point. I mean, I don't think we want our economy to be the gap. So the gap has to be what's the alternative to natural gas. And right now, geothermal and heat pumps are probably the two best alternatives. And a lot of people say heat pumps are expensive, but they really are coming down in cost, and they're going up in terms of technology and efficiency. I don't personally know a lot about geothermal in terms of how it technically works, but I know that for bigger projects, and affordable housing probably falls in that category, it is a viable alternative. I don't know if it's cheaper, but if gas is not going to be allowed in the future, it's something that I think developers should consider, because you're putting it in new construction now, as opposed to putting in something that may not have a total future.
Right. No, definitely. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. I'm just checking if there are any hands up. Oh, I see Seth. Go ahead, Seth.
Thank you so much. Sorry, we're not allowed to chat. I'm Seth Kramer with Goldman Sachs. Our compliance laws that do not allow me to chat. Frances, first of all, it was amazing to hear from you. I'm a born and raised New Yorker. There's not many folks like you left, and I think I call you like an OG, and like your experience and kind of where you are is really inspirational to me. So first of all, thank you for that. And
thank you.
I work in Goldman Sachs' corporate real estate group. We have a wonderful relationship with Con Ed. We pay you quite a bit of money, but we have a really strong relationship with the Con Ed team, both from an operations perspective and a corporate perspective, obviously. I wanted to hear more about how Con Ed is thinking about Local Law 97. Obviously, that's a huge impact to all commercial real estate owners in New York, and it's more or less a carbon tax, and we don't have to get into the discussion about that. And, it's very difficult to find renewable energy in Zone J. I know that you guys are working on decarboning your steam operations, which is really fantastic. I think you have a 2030 goal to do that. But, Local Law 97 is around the corner. We'd love to hear how Con Ed is thinking about that.
Sure. So we are on the Local Law 97 Advisory Board. So we're participating in the discussions. And I'm aware that a lot of the developers think that that law has gone too far. I guess what I would say is, if we're moving toward a renewable future, we need to start, or since we are moving toward a renewable, cleaner, and more sustainable future, we have to start somewhere. And I think affecting future buildings is a good way to slow the use of some of these fuels. And I think that the regulations that are being put on the building stock in New York for current buildings should be looked at in terms of what's affordable, what's doable, what's practical. One of the things I think across the board is we have some aggressive goals without a plan to get there totally. And I think that local law 7 is being looked at through those eyes right now. Like, can we get there? And the transition, I think, is really important, because we, with the exception of California, and maybe not even California, we probably have the most aggressive goals in the country. So we can really be the poster child for this can get done. But if it can't get done, I think that will be a problem. So I think local law 97 is well-intentioned and in the right direction, and perhaps some transition conversations have to happen in terms of how the goals are implemented.
Thanks, Frances. You know, I'm going to ask a question and then people can still raise their hand. Something I realized I didn't ask you about, I know the ABNY Foundation has a big priority around workforce development. And I know that's a priority for Con Ed as well. So I'd love to learn, and you know, we sort of touched on it in this idea when we were talking about the diversity of employees. But I would love to know more about what Con Ed specifically does around workforce development efforts here in New York. I think that would be interesting for this group.
Sure. So we have a workforce of 15,000 people in New York City and Westchester, 10,000 of whom are in the union and 5,000 in management. We have a learning center in Queens. I think we may be the only company in New York City that has a learning center where you can go for any kind of training you want. And so from a union perspective, you can come in with a high school diploma and a driver's license and become a skilled craftsperson and move up in your career. When we splice, which means like the wires in the ground, when we weld them together, it's called splicing. It's such a skilled craft that the person puts their name on the splicing. So that's how important this work is. It's one of the top union jobs, and you can get there by going to the Learning Center and training on company time and paid for by the company. I will tell you, the chairman has a lunch every year with anybody who's been in the company for 50 years or more. That's 50 years or more. And there's usually 15 to 30 people at that lunch. And they tell their stories about how they've had an entire career in this company. On the management side, I'd say it's so diverse what goes on in this company. We have gas, we have steam, we have electric, we have an entire environmental group, we have a financial group, we have a legal group, we have a real estate group, right? We have so many different things. We have corporate affairs group, so many different things that you can do in the company that if you choose to be here for your whole career, you can move around, and that's very much encouraged. I think utilities were places in the past that were very much cradle to grave jobs. And so people did start their career and stay the whole time. Not so much anymore, but we do have a lower level of attrition than a lot of companies. So we think that workforce development is critically important. And we have all kinds of plans. Like, you can have a personal development plan if you choose, where you decide what courses you want to take and you decide what jobs you want. And then if it's on your personal development plan, you can apply for that job. So there's a lot of that going on. And the Learning Center in Queens is a really special place because the instructors at the Learning Center are people who have been through different careers at Con Edison. So they they know how to teach, but they also have practical experience, and they understand that perhaps what sounds like the right thing to do is not necessarily the whole story. So we're really very proud of that. We also have all kinds of benefits, right? We have tuition reimbursement programs. We have professional development programs outside the company. So it's a really important piece of working here.
It's funny, I remember one of a small ABNY breakfast or roundtable, maybe it was a lunch, I had put together when I worked at ABNY was for Kevin Burke when he was the CEO. And I loved his story that he had really worked his way up through Con Ed, had so many different jobs. And it stayed with me all these years because I thought my outside perspective was he must be a really good CEO, or he's poised to be a great one because he understands so much of what it's like to be an employee on so many levels at the company. Mm-hmm. So that's great that you really do work on helping people rise up. That's wonderful. We're getting towards the end, and this is obviously a YP event. And so I do want to ask a little bit of that classic question of advice for YPs that are on the call today. So could you share a little advice you might have or that you give to YP young professionals, and really just, that what did you wish you knew earlier in your career kind of idea?
Sure. So a couple of things I'd say. One, don't make judgments about opportunities if you really don't know what they are. And one of the things I think about is when I was offered the job at Brooklyn Union Keyspan when I was 30, I didn't know what a utility was. I had no idea what a utility did. And I kind of was like very dismissive. I took the job because the mayor I worked for lost, and I wanted to leave government at the time, and very quickly learned like so much about the company and the field. And I've stayed in the energy field, which I think is critically important. So don't close doors for yourself that you might not realize what the opportunity is. The other thing I'd say is when you're in a job, don't be shy about volunteering for opportunities. The people that are like, that's not my job, that's not this, that's not that. I don't think they move up as quickly as, all hands on deck and willing to volunteer. And if you're in a field that has crises, don't ever let a crisis go by without learning. We have had many crises in Con Edison, and it's an operational company, and every one of them, I learned a lot. You meet people, you see people's true colors. Crises are a really good way to learn. From a personal perspective, I think unwavering ethics, personal credibility. It's a big city, it's a small world. People know who you are, and people know, when you're out for yourself or when you see the bigger picture, and you get a reputation. And I think that's important. And I would say the whole aspect of humility and empathy that perhaps in the past business leaders thought were weaknesses, I think are incredible strengths. And knowing how to connect with your employees. They say people care what you know after they know that you care, right? And it's if you think about it, if you're working with somebody that you think doesn't really care about you, you may have a different feeling. And learning from everybody, right? So you don't just learn up, you learn down, you learn across. You can always learn from people. And if you're open to different perspectives, perhaps you come to a better place than if you're not.
I love that. Thank you. And you said, retirement is around the corner, and you said that ABNY gets to keep you, which is wonderful. What else do you have planned?
So I'm working on the next phase of my life right now. And it was a big decision to step aside. I decided to allow myself to be uncomfortable and step aside before I have everything figured out. I would like to serve on corporate boards. It's very competitive, but I believe what I do in the space of environmental justice, corporate responsibility, corporate social responsibility, ESG, diversity and inclusion, stakeholder engagement, employee engagement. I believe those things are becoming much more important to companies. And I say in my elevator speech, I've been doing all those things before they had names, right? You know, paying attention to customers and the environment and employees. I think that's critical for companies. So I am pursuing that right now, corporate board work. And the other thing is I want to stay involved in the city, and I am going to stay with ABNY, and I haven't decided yet. I think I'm going to stay with the League of Conservation Voters. Actually, I know I'm going to stay with the League of Conservation Voters. Beyond that, I don't know yet. And just personally, I'm very philanthropic, and I plan to continue to do that personally. And, you know, have more time to like go to the theater and go to the dance and travel and read and ride my bike, and all of that is what I see as my future. But I'm way too young to do nothing, so I don't plan to do nothing.
Well, I think more theater and bike riding is well deserved, and I think a corporate board would be extremely lucky to have you. So I hope you have many to choose from. Frances, thanks for the time. The hour is up, and it was just, you were so open and honest and answered every question. And I love getting to spend time with you, virtual or in person. So thank you for your time. And I guess I'll hand it back over to ABNY to see if there's any final words, but I just really, a huge thank you. This was so enjoyable.
It's my pleasure. And I thank all of you too. You know, it's my story, but like, I appreciate all of you listening, and I hope I was able to impart some knowledge that you can use in your lives and your careers.
Definitely.
To echo Ruth, thank you so much, Frances. I mean, I really feel that everyone is going to leave this chat feeling a little bit more inspired and a little bit more motivated to really make the most of our work and being committed to New York. And it's so great to hear from somebody that's done it, that's made an impact, and we really appreciate it. And we really appreciate you. We're so lucky to have you. So thank you so much for joining us. Really quickly, in the spirit of making an impact and joining and getting more involved, I just want to plug YP steering. Applications are now open, and we're actually reserving YP steering committee spots for ABNY Associates, which is you guys. So would encourage you all to join. And there are a couple YP steering committee members, Safina, Steph, and Ruth on the call. And I'm sure they'll answer any questions, and I'll answer any questions. So look out for that. But again, Frances, thank you so much. Thank you, Ruth. This was so wonderful. And Seth. And I appreciate all of you so much. So thank you.
Have a good day, everyone.
Have a great day.